Good morning and welcome to the Point. This morning we talk about Decision 2016 with the chairman of the Republican Party of the state of Michigan. You might say that politics is in her DNA. Her father once considered a run for the Attorney General's office. Her mother ran for U.S. Senate. Her grandfather was the governor of state of Michigan. Her uncle was the governor of Massachusetts, and oh yes, the Republican presidential nominee just 4 years ago. Ronna Romney McDaniel is the head of the Michigan Republican Party, and she talks to us about that job. By the time this airs, you'll be, 30 days or so short of being the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party for a year. Tell me what that experience has been like, because I think for people at home, and you may have had a better idea going into this than some, but people at home don't have a really clear picture as to what you do.
Well, the party, the Republican Party, our role is to get the state prepared for the next election cycle. So as state party chair, we're here putting the ground game in place, starting to reach out to voters, putting the infrastructure together so that we can get our message across and ultimately turn out voters on election day to elect our candidates. It's been almost a year since I've been chair. It has been wonderful. I've traveled the whole state. It is spectacular to meet people, to get to know them, to hear their stories, from business owners to families to why they live in Michigan. So I've been so humbled traveling the state. The job is a lot of time. It's been a little more than I expected, but it's helped me figure out how to balance my family life with my work life like so many Michiganders have to do on a daily basis.
And I can attest to that because out of the blue, I was on a speaking engagement up in the 1st Congressional District, and I pulled into the hotel where I was staying that night, and you were outside on your cell phone talking about somebody and getting ready for a district meeting up there. So as you travel around the state, what have you learned from the party regulars, the volunteers, the people who are interested in these races as we prepare for this election cycle upcoming? We're going to talk about the presidential aspect of it, but just in general as we go.
Well, Michigan's really turned around, and I think there's a great optimism about the leadership in Lansing. And it was just 5 years ago that we had 15% unemployment, that jobs were fleeing our state. And so from a personal level, I get to see the impact of Republican policies on everyday lives. So, from a number, we're at 5% unemployment. I see people having hope again, investing in job opportunities again, kids graduating from college and wanting to work in Michigan and actually having a job that they can have in Michigan. So that's very gratifying and gives me a great passion for what I do and wanting to elect Republicans so we can continue that great leadership in our state.
Now, that's your view of the last 5 years. Your counterpart over on Townsend Street is going to say Republicans have gutted the budget, that they have been terrible for schools and public safety, that they've given big tax breaks to their crony friends in the business world, which will be a quite different take than what you just gave us. So that's part of what you're going to have to counter as you move forward in this cycle.
Well, the record is there and the numbers bear it out. I mean, we've seen unemployment go from 15 to 5%. We've seen 420,000 new jobs come to our state. That's affecting people. That's affecting families. It's making Michigan a better place to live. We have hope in our state again. And we've balanced 5 budgets 5 years in a row on time. It wasn't that long ago, and I remember this. My daughter's teacher had been laid off, and we went to school and we said, well, is she going to get her job back? She's a spectacular teacher. And they said, we don't know. The budget hasn't been passed yet, so we don't know if we can hire her back. That was under Jennifer Granholm. The certainty of having a fiscal house in order has made our state a place that people are gravitating to and thriving in and investing in, and that's affecting people.
The election cycle never ends. There was a time when I covered politics that you would be very involved for a year, and then the next year it would be somewhat quiet, and then the next year you would have another cycle. It just never ends. And so as we prepare for this presidential race, and we'll spend the second half of the show talking about that, obviously you also have to focus on other individual races. The race for governor has already begun for 3 years away, but the most pressing issue at the state level will be the state house, and Democrats are clearly going to make a full court press to try to retake the majority in the House, because that's the only thing that they can really shoot for in this election cycle. How intense is that going to get?
We have 39 open seats this cycle with no incumbent, and a lot of them are in vulnerable Republican districts. And Michigan is a purple state, but we're a lot of times a blue and then a red state. So of course we have our work cut out for us to keep our majority in the House. And our policies have shown Michiganders that Republican leadership makes life better for everyday families. But we've got to take that message out. The party has to build that organization. We're doing that. We're building that ground game. We're investing in finding out who those likely voters are, our absentee program, our walk program. All those things will come together to help us be successful in 2016, and I believe we will keep our majority in the House.
To put that in perspective, there are only 110 members in the House, so you've got 39 open seats, so you're going to have a whole new group of freshmen in there, which speaks somewhat to term limits and somewhat of the way the House functions, which is for another show and maybe some other guests, which would be interesting to talk about. But how do you go about identifying, because obviously you don't get to choose, but how do you go about identifying candidates that can be competitive? Obviously some will have to win a primary, some will not be primary. Some of those seats are going to be safe. There are some in West Michigan that are traditionally Republican seats that whoever wins the primary is going to be the likely eventual representative. But there are, what, a half dozen, 8 seats that you really have to concentrate on in those vulnerable seats?
Yeah, recruiting is a huge part of it. The House Republican caucus does that. We work with them. We're part of the recruitment efforts. We want people who are going to govern well, and then the party stays out of it. We are neutral during the primary. Whomever comes through, we let the town or the district that person's going to represent, they get to choose who's best to represent them. And whomever wins that contest, we're going to get through to the general.
When you prepare for all of the different things that come along, for example, you were at a debate in Cleveland, you have your state committee meetings, you had the Mackinac Conference, you have all of these different things that are all party functions. How much more or less involved is it than you expected it to be? Because I was just going through my mind just the different places that our paths have crossed in coverage, but the difference is I show up to cover them, you have to plan them, or you and your staff have to plan them.
Yeah, we're unique in Michigan that we have so much involvement, that we are able to have the Mackinac Conference where we bring in presidential candidates so our grassroots can see them. And we have obviously state committee meetings and conventions and all these types of opportunities for our grassroots to get together. It's very involved. I have an amazing staff. But really the overall goal is to help our voters be as informed as possible and have as much input into each election as possible. So when they talk to a candidate one-on-one and they share the things that they're concerned about, that candidate goes away better informed about what's happening on the ground. And we've been so blessed to have 27 visits from Republican candidates in Michigan since I've been chair. That's in contrast to the Democrats who've had 3 visits. Hillary Clinton's come here 1 time, and it was only for a fundraiser. Our candidates are getting across the state. They're meeting our voters. They're hearing their concerns. They're going to govern better and be better prepared to be president by interacting with Michiganders.
What do you know about the state party, about politics, and about being the chairman today that you didn't know a year ago?
That's a great question. I think I know that we have a fantastic party. And I already knew that, but when you meet people on a one-on-one basis and you get to hear their stories, it's very inspiring. It's kind of the fuel that keeps me going. They care about our country, like so many of us. They give time away from other things that they can be doing to volunteer and be part of the dialogue and getting people elected. I think that's critical. And the energy that's there right now around our candidates for president is so exciting. And there is a concern about where our country's heading and what's happened under President Obama, especially from a national security standpoint. And I hear that a lot. That's been a constant theme as I've traveled the country, traveled the state. With regards to Benghazi or ISIS, that's something that people are very concerned about at a national level and want to see a change in the White House.
Let's talk about what that means from a presidential standpoint here in the state of Michigan. Let's start by going back to the very beginning. The legislature weighs in on when the primary is going to be. So this year it is going to be when? March
8th is going to be our primary. There will be 4 primaries in February. The traditional first states, New Hampshire, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. Then March 1st will be a giant Super Tuesday, primarily southern states. It's being called the SEC primary. And then you come to Michigan. We'll be the biggest delegate pot on March 8th. We will be a proportional state, which means our delegates will be allocated proportional to the overall vote. And then we're the precursor to March 15th, where a lot of states go to that winner-take-all method.
So talk about the difference there, because if you go to the proportional method, which is set by the date, and so by being ahead of that March 15th date you are, it does a couple of things. It could entice more candidates to come here because even if they can't win, they can draw some delegates. So there is that. But it also keeps Michigan from being the bigger prize, the winner take all, where you get all of those delegates. And even though we have fewer than we used to, we're still a relatively high delegate count. So on balance, how does that play, do you think, when it comes to the amount of tension? And part of it is a bit of a crystal ball thing, because everybody's got a different strategy. Because somebody may say, you know what, I'm skipping Michigan because I'm 8th there and I'm going to go on to Ohio or wherever I'm going to go. So we don't know. But how much attention does that draw to the state?
I think we've seen that it's drawn a lot of attention to our state to have 27 visits, like I had mentioned, from Republican candidates in this past year. They're giving Michigan the attention it deserves. I do think the way we hit on the calendar and what comes after us, we're March 8th, but after us on March 15th is Ohio and Illinois and Missouri and Florida and North Carolina. 3 of those are Midwestern states. If you do well in Michigan, I think it's logical to think that that will help you have victory in those other states. So candidates are spending a lot of time there. But there's another factor to that, and that is as they spend time here for the primaries, they're also building a ground game for the general. And so to have our candidates on the ground across the state at the level we've had them is going to make us more competitive at the general election. And the Democrats really have not been in Michigan. They're taking it for granted. And I'm glad to see our candidates listening to Michiganders and looking at our state as an opportunity to win the White House.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I can't recall. On that same Tuesday, on the 8th, is it Mississippi and a couple of other states?
It is Mississippi and I believe Idaho, but I'm not
sure.
But we are the biggest delegate pot that day for sure.
And so as people start to see these candidates come in and out, what is the process if they want to participate in that primary?
Well, candidates sometimes contact the party and sometimes they don't, but we are always reaching out to the candidates and trying to get the information, and they can always call State Party to get that information, and we'll help them connect with any candidate that they want to go see in any event.
And then when it comes around to the 8th of March and they want to vote, what do people have to do? What should they know about that voting process?
It's just like any other vote in Michigan. You go to your precinct, you stand in line and you vote, and the Democrats are going to be also using the primary this cycle. There's not going to be many other elections that day, some special House races across the state, I think 3 of those, but just go and vote for your presidential candidate.
We are a state where you don't have to register your party affiliation, and I think a lot of people like that. However, as a party chairman, you know that allows anybody to go vote in any primary, and in the past, I can say at least anecdotally, that I believe Democrats have had an influence on who the eventual winner in the Republican presidential primary was. Do you worry about that? Are you concerned that by that point there may be somebody that Democrats might prefer to see win to embarrass somebody that expects to win?
I'm not that concerned about it. I hope that Democrats don't try and create mischief in our primary, especially now that they're using the primary process to choose their delegates, which they have not done in the past. It is helpful to have that data from these primaries. People do have to come in and say, I want a Republican or a Democrat ballot. They have to sign a piece of paper affirming that they are actually a Republican. So that might preclude some crossover and some mischief. I hope that doesn't happen.
And to be clear, that information then becomes available, but it is not listed on your voter registration. It doesn't preclude you in 4 years or in the next primary to vote in a different party.
Yeah, the Secretary of State has that information, but it does not. Again, we are not a party registration state. You are not registered as a Republican for the rest of your life until you change it, until that next election. You are just picking a Republican ballot for that individual election.
When we come back, we'll talk more politics with the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party and what she thinks would be a successful 2016. Next, To the Point. Welcome back to The Point. Ronna Romney McDaniel comes from a family of politicians. Her grandfather was the governor of the state of Michigan. Her uncle was the governor of Massachusetts and the Republican presidential nominee just 4 years ago. Plus, her parents were both involved in politics too. And she says she knows what it would take to have a successful decision in 2016. 1988
Yes.
was the last time that Republicans were able to win Michigan. And Democrats have prevailed, whether the eventual president was a Republican or a Democrat, ever since. It's something that every party chairman I've talked to and a lot of Republicans that I've talked to, even though they have been successful in the governor's races and races for the state house and very successful in the state senate, but not that presidential prize. What do you have to do to change that on your watch?
Well, we need the candidates to come in and take part in the Michigan
And as
story.
you point out, they are doing.
Yeah, and they've got to share that Michigan story. I mean, we are a comeback state because of Republican leadership. We know what it was like 5 years ago when jobs were fleeing our state, where families were filing for bankruptcy and losing their homes. It was awful. It was decimating I know I had friends who were struggling so bad. And so to see Republican leadership come and turn this state around, I think if our candidate can talk about that and taking that same type of leadership to the White House, putting our fiscal house in order, focusing on national security, I think we have a potential to tell a story that will resonate with Michiganders because we've lived it.
You worked on your uncle's campaign 4 years ago,
I did.
and one of the things that happened was, and these are my words, not yours, Mitt Romney appeared to be the inevitable nominee. However, the process of this multitude of debates and all of these primaries, 1 week there would be Herman Cain, 1 week there would be Michelle Bachmann, 1 week there would be Rick Santorum, all of these alternatives to Mitt Romney that kept surfacing. Ultimately, he was the nominee, but all of that process, at least from my observations, had to be hurtful to that campaign in some way. If not in the long term, at least financially, it cost a whole lot more. How do you see the process this year? Nobody could have possibly guessed there'd still be 12 or 14 or however many candidates there are out there. Some of those, even that are below 1%, show no signs of dropping out. Maybe they don't until the 1st of February when we finally get to Iowa. How does that impact this primary? And does that make it more difficult for Republican voters or more difficult for the ultimate nominee?
Well, our base is energized. I mean, we're getting all the attention right now because we don't have a coronated nominee. We have a contest, we have a dialogue. There are differences between our candidates on important issues. It is important for the voters to turn in and see who's best suited to represent them on these key issues. I think it's been wonderful. The RNC did step in and limit the debate process. It did get out of control when Mitt ran. I think there were 23 debates. Now there'll be 12. That's helpful to our candidate. Cleaning up the primary calendar. In 2012, we almost had primaries in December. Now they're more spread out. I think that's going to help the process. But overall, the energy, the excitement, and the will of our grassroots is there. They are ready to take the White House back. And it's not just because we think we have the best candidate in the message, which we do, but they're also very concerned about the leadership we've seen in Washington under President Obama and Hillary Clinton. We are not in a better place than we were when he took office on the national security front. He called ISIS a JV team. He has not handled that appropriately. Hillary Clinton just gave him an A in leadership and said she would model her presidency after his presidency. That's concerning. And I think even beyond that, she has said that her greatest enemy that she's the most proud of is Republicans. How is she ever going to bring our country together on big issues that we all know we have to tackle, if she can't work with Republicans? You're going to have to look across the aisle and work with the other party if we're going to tackle things like entitlements and tax reform and immigration and national security. That's what voters want to hear. I've never, ever seen Hillary Clinton be a uniter. She has run as a divider, and that is not what our nation needs right now.
As you and I talk, and we're in the holiday season as this is played back, we don't know exactly what the outcome is when it comes to the narrative. But at least today, the narrative has switched tremendously because of the attacks in Paris and in California. and national security is the issue that everybody is talking to. It's interesting because somebody like a Lindsey Graham, who came into this campaign talking about national security, as we talk right now, below 1 percentage point, but he still is one who brings some of those credentials because of his personal experience and his time in Washington. Does the way this narrative has changed, at least for now, because we know it can change again, does that change the direction of the Republican primary?
Well, it has. We had a debate in December that absolutely was dedicated to national security. You saw our candidates are in different places on their policy. I think that's good that we have a dialogue. I think it's good that they're having that debate. It's good for the voters to hear where they stand before they elect them to be president. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. When you have schools closed in California because of threats, it's hitting our home front. I don't want to be worried about sending my kids to school. I don't want to be worried about going through my everyday activities and worrying about an attack. When President Obama calls it an act of gun violence and doesn't recognize that it's a terrorist attack, that's a concern. It's a concern that Hillary Clinton's not calling it what it is. We have to address that for what it is if we're going to defeat it. And Republicans have shown over and over again through our entire field that they're better equipped to handle national security than the Democrat alternative.
When you look back, when we sit down at this time next year, that will be post-election, whatever the outcome is, what makes, beyond winning elections, and I understand that's the ultimate goal, but what makes this next year successful for you as the chairman of the Michigan Republican Party?
Well, I want to keep our majority in the House. I want to keep the comeback going. I'm so proud of what our governor and our Senate and our House have done to turn our state around. And I'm proud of them on a personal level. It's affected my life. It's affected my friends' lives, my neighbors, my family. This is a state I love. I want to see it thrive. I want to see it be a state that people want to come back to. And I know that the governor and the leadership we've had in Lansing has made that possible. So for me, that would be a huge success to hand him a House so that he can continue to govern at the level he has for the next 2 years of his term. Also to win the Supreme Court seats, to return Justice David Viviano to the bench, and Justice Larson, who's amazing. She clerked under Scalia. She's spectacular. I don't know if you've met her. To return her to the bench, and our congressional delegation. And we want to be competitive presidentially. We want Michigan to turn red at the presidential level, and we're going to do everything we can to make that happen.
We'll have more to the point in just a moment. Happy New Year, and I hope you'll join us throughout Decision 2016 every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock for To the Point.